In the heart of Central Europe during the tumultuous 1930s, a small but proud nation was crafting what would become one of the most significant armored fighting vehicles of the Second World War. Czechoslovakia, a democracy born from the ashes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, possessed something that would soon make it invaluable to Adolf Hitler's war machine: some of the world's most advanced tank manufacturing capabilities. The story that unfolds is one of tragic irony, where Czech engineering excellence would serve the very forces that destroyed their nation's independence, and where a tank designed to defend freedom would become an instrument of conquest across Europe. The roots of this tale reach back to the aftermath of World War I, when the newly independent Czechoslovakia inherited not just political freedom, but two of Europe's premier arms manufacturers. After the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Czechoslovakia became an independent state. Beside its independence, it also inherited two military weapon manufacturers, Škoda, Pilsen, and Českomoravská Kolben Daněk, ČKD, Prague. ČKD was formed back in 1871 and was initially involved in the production of industrial machinery, while, in later years, it would begin to develop and produce military equipment, like field kitchens, automobiles, tractors, etc. This industrial legacy would prove both a blessing and a curse for the young nation. Throughout the interwar period, fierce competition between these two giants drove rapid innovation in armored vehicle design. Czech arms companies Škoda and ČKD were in direct competition for Czechoslovakian army contracts throughout the interwar years. This rivalry created an environment where cutting-edge technology flourished, as each company strived to outdo the other in securing lucrative military contracts, both domestically and internationally. The competition was not merely commercial, it was a matter of national pride and technological advancement that would ultimately benefit the entire European arms industry. By the mid-1930s, both companies had established themselves as major players in the international arms market, selling their products to countries across the globe. Their tanks were considered among the finest available, often superior to those produced by larger, more established military powers. The quality of Czech engineering was such that nations from Peru to Iran sought out their products, recognizing that these smaller manufacturers could often provide more advanced and reliable equipment than their larger competitors. However, it was ČKD that would create the machine that would define this story. In 1935, the company was grappling with the limitations of their current production, particularly the troublesome LT-35 tank they had been producing in partnership with Škoda. In 1935, the Czechoslovak tank manufacturer ČKD was looking for a replacement for the LT-35 tank they were jointly producing with Škoda Works. The LT-35 had proven problematic in several critical areas, suffering from reliability issues that made it unsuitable for the demanding requirements of modern warfare. The primary problems with the LT-35 were both dangerous and debilitating. The tank's pneumatic steering and transmission systems had a tendency to fail completely in cold weather conditions, leaving crews stranded and vulnerable on the battlefield. Even more seriously, the extensive use of riveted construction in the hull meant that when the tank was struck by enemy fire, the interior would fill with deadly metal fragments as the rivets sheared off under impact. This design flaw made the LT-35 as dangerous to its own crew as it was to the enemy. Determined to address these fundamental flaws, ČKD's engineers embarked on an ambitious project to create a completely new tank design. They abandoned the small road wheel configuration that had been standard in their earlier models and instead adopted a suspension system inspired by American designer J. Walter Christie's innovative approach. They decided to abandon the small road wheels used on earlier designs and adopted a Christie-type system, with 4 large road wheels on each side and layers of leaf springs for suspension. This new suspension system would prove to be one of the tank's greatest strengths, providing excellent cross-country mobility and mechanical reliability. The new tank, initially designated as the TNH and later known as the TNHPS, represented a quantum leap forward in Czech tank design. The engineers replaced the troublesome pneumatic systems with reliable mechanical alternatives and substituted welded construction for the dangerous riveted assembly that had plagued its predecessor. The result was a vehicle that combined the best features of contemporary tank design with several innovative improvements that set it apart from anything else in production at the time. CKD produced a modified version of the TNH for the new Czechoslovak specification, the TNHPS. The new tank won the contest, and in April 1938 an order was placed for 150 as the LT Vezin 38 or LT-38. This victory in the competition represented the culmination of years of development work and positioned CKD as the leading tank manufacturer in Czechoslovakia. The LT Vezin 38 incorporated all the lessons learned from earlier designs, while pushing the boundaries of what was possible with the technology available at the time. The technical specifications of the LT Vezin 38 were impressive by any standard of the era. The tank weighed approximately 9.7 tons and was powered by a 125 horsepower Praga EPA engine that could propel it to speeds of up to 42 kilometers per hour on roads, making it one of the fastest tanks in the world. The main armament consisted of a 37mm Škoda A7 gun, which was significantly more powerful than the weapons mounted on most contemporary light tanks. The two-man turret was centrally located and housed the tank's main armament, a 37mm Škoda A7 gun with 90 rounds stored on board. It was equipped with a 7.92mm machine gun to the right of the main ordnance. The armor protection, while not excessive by later standards, was well designed and effectively distributed. It was a conventional pre-World War II tank design, with riveted armor and a rear engine. The riveted armor was mostly unsloped and varied in thickness from 10mm to 25mm in most versions. This armor scheme provided adequate protection against the anti-tank weapons available in the late 1930s while keeping the vehicle's weight within reasonable limits for its mechanical components. The crew arrangement was carefully planned to maximize efficiency in combat operations. Unlike many tanks of the period, the LT Vezin 38 featured a four-man crew with distinct responsibilities: a commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. This division of labor allowed for more effective coordination in battle and reduced the workload on individual crew members, a factor that would prove crucial during extended combat operations. As 1938 progressed, the international situation in Europe was becoming increasingly unstable. The Munich Agreement of September 1938 had already begun the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, with the Sudetenland being handed over to Nazi Germany. In September 1938, the country was forced to turn the Sudetenland over to Germany. After this blow, most defense contracts were cancelled, but work continued on the tanks. Despite this political upheaval and the cancellation of many defense contracts, CKD continued working on their new tank design, perhaps sensing that it might represent their last opportunity to create an independent Czech armored fighting vehicle. The company also pursued international export opportunities with remarkable success during this period. The TNH design had already proven its worth in international markets, with variants being sold to multiple countries. Iran purchased 50 TNH tanks armed with a Škoda 37mm gun. A Peruvian mission went to Europe in 1935 and looked at tanks from several major manufacturers before settling on the Czech LTP. Peru bought 24 of them. These export sales demonstrated the international recognition of Czech engineering excellence and provided valuable combat feedback, that was incorporated into the final LT Vezin 38 design. The export variants also showcased the flexibility of the basic design. Each customer received tanks modified to meet their specific requirements, with changes to armor thickness, armament configurations, and internal arrangements. This adaptability would later prove invaluable when the design entered German service, as it allowed for rapid modification to meet Wehrmacht specifications without major redesign efforts. However, time was running out for independent Czechoslovakia. In March 1939, the Slovak portion of the country seceded, and the Germans occupied the Czech area, which became the Protectorate of Bohemia-Moravia. On March 15, 1939, German forces completed their occupation of what remained of Czechoslovakia, and with it, they inherited one of Europe's most advanced tank manufacturing complexes. The German acquisition of the Czech arms industry represented a windfall beyond their wildest expectations. In March 1939, what was left of the Czechoslovakian nation was absorbed into Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. Included in the newly acquired loot was a cache of about 470 armored fighting vehicles. Some were state-of-the-art for their time, while others were outdated and useless. Among these vehicles, the Germans discovered approximately 150 nearly completed LT Version 38 tanks, along with the production facilities and skilled workforce necessary to manufacture many more. The timing of this acquisition could hardly have been more fortuitous for the German war effort. Before the onset of the World War II, the German military actively engaged in expanding its new Panzer divisions. Consequently, attention was given to the development of new tank types in the interwar period. However, due to stipulations laid out by the Treaty of Versailles and the lack of production capacity in Germany, the more desirable and stronger Panzer III and I-4 couldn't be produced in sufficient numbers. Instead, the Wehrmacht was forced to rely on their weakly armed Panzertruppe and Sekundensturm. The German evaluation of their newly acquired Czech tanks revealed just how superior they were to existing German armor. Luckily for the Germans, during the takeover of Czechoslovakia in early 1939, they came into possession of the Škoda and ČKD factories. With them, they obtained over 200 LT Verzeron 35, and more importantly, some 150, not all were finished by that time, LT Verzeron 38. While both would be put into service, the Germans were far more interested in the more advanced LT Verz 38, which compared favorably with their much heavier and more expensive Panzer III medium tanks. The German reaction to the LT Verzen 38 was one of genuine amazement at the quality of Czech engineering. The tanks so impressed German military experts that they immediately ordered the continuation of production under German supervision. The Germans also took over the strong Czech arms industry. ČKD became BMM, and the LT-38 became the Panzerkampfwagen 38T. T standing for Czech, the German for Czech. The original Czech tanks became the AUSF-A, with 78 delivered by September 1939, and a series of improved version carried production of the gun tank into 1942. Production under German control began almost immediately, with ČKD, now renamed Böhmisch-Mährische Maschinenfabrik, or BMM, continuing to manufacture tanks according to the original Czech specifications, with only minor modifications. The production rate was to be around 25 vehicles per month. Beside the first 10 vehicles, 12 were completed in June, 39 in July, 18 in August, 31 in September, 30 in October, with the last 11 completed in November 1939. This production rate would steadily increase as the Germans refined the manufacturing process and expanded the facilities. The German designation system reflected their recognition of the tank's foreign origin while acknowledging its importance to their armored forces. It was first introduced into German service under the name LTM-38. This was changed on 16th January 1940 to Panzerkampfwagen 38T and came to be known as the Panzer 38T. It was first introduced into German service under the name LTM-38. This was changed on 16th January 1940 to Panzerkampfwagen 38T and came to be known as the Panzer 38T. The T suffix became the standard German method of identifying captured or foreign manufactured equipment, with T standing for Tschechisch, the German word for Czech. German modifications to the original design were generally limited and focused on improving combat effectiveness within the existing framework. In German service, a loader position was added to the turret by reducing the ammunition capacity by 18 rounds. All future Panzer 38T tanks were rebuilt according to this specification, and those already in service were modified accordingly. The commander had to aim and fire the main gun in addition to his role as commander. Minor adjustments, such as adjustable seats for the driver and firmer footing for the commander, gunner, and loader, were also made. The Panzer 38T made its combat debut during the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, where it immediately distinguished itself as a reliable and effective fighting machine. The tank's performance exceeded all expectations, demonstrating not only its technical superiority, but also the soundness of the Czech design philosophy that had created it. German tank crews quickly developed an appreciation for their Czech-built vehicles, often finding them more reliable and better constructed than equivalent German tanks. The Polish campaign provided the first real-world test of the Panzer 38T under combat conditions, and the results were overwhelmingly positive. The tank's mechanical reliability proved exceptional, with breakdown rates significantly lower than those experienced by German-manufactured vehicles. The 37mm gun proved capable of penetrating Polish armor at reasonable ranges, while the tank's speed and mobility allowed it to exploit breakthroughs and pursue retreating enemy forces effectively. However, the true test of the Panzer 38T would come during the German offensive in Western Europe in 1940, where it would help spearhead the most successful military campaign in modern history. The tank's role in the defeat of France would establish its reputation as one of the most effective light tanks of the war and demonstrate the enduring value of Czech engineering excellence, even under foreign ownership. When German forces launched their attack on Western Europe on May 10, 1940, the Panzer 38T was at the forefront of the assault. Following the renewal of major operations in the West on May 10, 1940, Czech-designed tanks of the German army roll rapidly across France and toward the English Channel. Using Czech technology enabled the Panzer arm of the Wehrmacht to deliver firepower and mobility to the front in the early days of the war. The tank formed a crucial component of the German armored spearheads that broke through Allied lines and achieved the stunning victory that brought France to its knees in just 6 weeks. The 7th Panzer Division, commanded by the then relatively unknown General Major Erwin Rommel, was particularly well equipped with Panzer 38T tanks. Rommel's division would earn the nickname Ghost Division during the French campaign, largely due to their rapid advances that left even German high command uncertain of their location. The reliability and speed of the Czech-built tanks played a significant role in these lightning-fast movements across the French countryside. The effectiveness of the Panzer 38T in the French campaign can be measured by both its tactical performance and the strategic results it helped achieve. The tank's combination of firepower, protection, and mobility proved ideally suited to the demands of blitzkrieg warfare. Its 37mm gun was more than adequate against French armor, while its mechanical reliability ensured that the maximum number of tanks remained operational throughout the rapid advance. German tank crews began to develop an almost affectionate relationship with their Czech-built vehicles during this period. The tanks consistently performed beyond expectations, often covering hundreds of kilometers without major mechanical failures, a reliability record that German-manufactured tanks of the era could rarely match. This mechanical excellence was not accidental, but rather the result of careful engineering and quality control that had been hallmarks of Czech industrial production throughout the interwar period. The success of the Panzer 38T during the Western European campaign led to continued production and gradual improvements to the basic design. The conclusion of the war against France and the Netherlands saw an upgrading of the 30 The D model entered service in September 1940, with the E and F series appearing in November 1940. Frontal armor was increased to 50 mm by riveting two 25 mm plates together on all forward surfaces. The armor on the turret and upper sides of the fighting compartment was also increased. The tank's speed was stepped up to 35 mph. Over 525 of the latter two types were produced in Czechoslovakia for the Germans between November 1940 and October 1941. These improvements reflected German recognition that while the basic design was excellent, it needed enhancement to meet the evolving demands of modern warfare. The armor upgrades were particularly important as Allied anti-tank capabilities improved, and the increased protection would prove crucial during the upcoming campaign in the Soviet Union, where the tank would face its greatest challenge. The Panzer 38T also played important roles in other German campaigns during this period, including the rapid conquest of Yugoslavia and Greece in the spring of 1941. In these operations, the tank once again demonstrated its versatility and reliability, operating effectively in diverse terrain conditions, from the mountainous regions of the Balkans to the coastal plains of the Mediterranean. However, it was the German invasion of the Soviet Union, launched on June 22, 1941, that would mark both the zenith and the beginning of the end for the Panzer 38T as a frontline battle tank. Operation Barbarossa represented the largest military operation in human history, and the Panzer 38T would play a significant role in the initial German successes, while also encountering the limitations that would ultimately lead to its obsolescence. 3 entire German Panzer divisions, the 7th, 8th, and 20th, were equipped primarily with Panzer 38T tanks for the opening phases of the Eastern Campaign. These divisions formed crucial components of the German armored spearheads that achieved stunning initial success against the Red Army. The tank's reliability proved especially valuable during the rapid advances of the first months of the campaign, when maintaining mechanical readiness was often more important than armor thickness or gun caliber. The vast distances of the Soviet Union and the primitive state of many roads placed enormous strain on German armored vehicles. In these challenging conditions, the Panzer 38T consistently outperformed its German counterparts in terms of mechanical reliability and operational availability. German maintenance records from this period show that Czech-built tanks required significantly less service time than equivalent German vehicles, allowing more tanks to remain in action for longer periods. However, the encounter with Soviet armor revealed critical limitations in the Panzer 38T's design that had not been apparent during earlier campaigns. The appearance of the Soviet T-34 medium tank and KV-1 heavy tank fundamentally changed the nature of armored warfare on the Eastern Front. These Soviet tanks featured armor that was not only thicker than anything previously encountered, but also sloped at angles that greatly increased its effective thickness against incoming projectiles. The 37mm gun of the Panzer 38T, which had proven adequate against Polish, French, and British armor, was virtually useless against the frontal armor of these new Soviet tanks. Even more troubling, the Soviet tanks mounted guns that could easily penetrate the Panzer 38T's armor at ranges where the German tank could not effectively fight back. This disparity in firepower and protection made continued use of the Panzer 38T in frontline roles increasingly dangerous and ultimately futile. German tank commander Otto Carius provided a vivid and harrowing account of the tank's vulnerability when faced with modern Soviet anti-tank weapons. His experience, recorded in his post-war memoir, illustrates the tragic reality faced by crews in obsolete vehicles. A hit against our tank, a metallic crack, the scream of a comrade, and that was all there was. A large piece of armor plating had been penetrated next to the radio operator's seat. No one had to tell us to get out. Not until I had run my hand across my face while crawling in the ditch next to the road did I discover that they had also got me. Our radio operator had lost his left arm. We cursed the brittle and inelastic Czech steel that gave the Russian 47mm anti-tank gun so little trouble. The pieces of our own armor plating and assembly bolts caused considerably more damage than the shrapnel of the round itself. This account reveals not only the technical inadequacy of the tank's protection, but also the human cost of continuing to use obsolete equipment against modern weapons. Carius's criticism of the brittle and inelastic Czech steel was somewhat unfair, as the armor had been designed to meet the threat standards of the late 1930s, not the much more powerful weapons of 1941. However, his testimony accurately reflects the desperate situation faced by German tank crews as the war evolved beyond the capabilities of their equipment. The limitations exposed on the Eastern Front led to a rapid reassessment of the Panzer 38T's role within the German armored forces. The above report highlights the reason why the 38T was pulled out of front lines in favor of the heavier Panzer III, Panzer IV, and Stug through. Panzer 38T continued to serve after 1941 as a reconnaissance vehicle and in anti-partisan units for some time. This transition from frontline combat vehicle to specialized roles reflected the pragmatic German approach to equipment utilization. Rather than simply discarding the tanks, they found new applications where the vehicle's advantages could still be exploited. The decision to end production of the gun tank version was made in 1942, when it became clear that the vehicle's armament and protection were no longer adequate for modern battlefield conditions. Production ended in 1942, when its main armament was deemed inadequate. In all, over 1,400 Panzer 38Ts were manufactured. This production total represented a significant contribution to German armored strength during the crucial early years of World War II, when the Wehrmacht achieved its greatest successes. However, the end of production for the gun tank variant did not mean the end of the Panzer 38T story. The robust and reliable chassis that had made the original tank so successful provided an excellent foundation for a variety of specialized vehicles that would serve the German war effort throughout the remainder of the conflict. This second life as a chassis for derivatives would prove even more significant than the original tank's combat career. The first and most important of these derivative vehicles was the Marder III tank destroyer, which mounted powerful anti-tank guns on the modified Panzer 38T chassis. This conversion addressed the firepower limitations that had made the original tank obsolete, while retaining the mechanical reliability that had always been its greatest strength. The Marder III would become one of the most successful tank destroyers of the war, demonstrating that the basic soundness of the Czech design could be adapted to meet evolving battlefield requirements. The development of the Marder III represented a masterstroke of military engineering, combining available resources to create a vehicle that was both effective and economical to produce. By mounting captured Soviet 76.2mm guns on the Panzer 38T chassis, German engineers created a tank destroyer that could engage the formidable T-34 on equal terms while utilizing existing production facilities and expertise. Over 525 of the latter two types were produced in Czechoslovakia for the Germans between November 1940 and October 1941. Whereas production of the 35T was halted by 1939, the Germans not only continued making the 38T in different marks, but exported the tank to their allies, demonstrating the continued value of the basic design even as battlefield conditions evolved. The ultimate evolution of the Panzer 38T chassis came with the development of the Jagdpanzer 38, better known as the Hetzer. This tank destroyer represented the culmination of German experience with the Czech chassis, incorporating all the lessons learned from previous variants while addressing the shortcomings that had limited earlier versions. This new weapon was put into production in April 1944 and produced until 1945 by both Škoda and BMM. Between April 1944 and the following May, over 2,584 were built. The Hetzer first saw action in July 1944 and was subsequently issued to tank hunter units attached to all division-sized formations. Moving at 30 mm and protected by 60 mm frontal and 20 mm rear armor, the Hetzer was a dangerous adversary. The Hetzer was also manufactured in flamethrower, armored recovery, ammunition mover, and mobile heavy artillery carrier versions. The Hetzer's success demonstrated the enduring value of the original Czech design philosophy. Despite being based on a chassis that was nearly a decade old, the Hetzer became one of Germany's most effective tank destroyers and remained in production until the very end of the war. Its low profile made it difficult for enemy forces to spot and engage, while its powerful gun could destroy any Allied tank at reasonable ranges. The variety of roles filled by vehicles based on the Panzer 38T chassis was truly remarkable. Other PZKW-38T forms pressed into service became the Flampanzer self-propelled armored flamethrower and SDKFZ-140 Flakpanzer 38T anti-aircraft gunnery platform. The latter was fitted with a 20 mm anti-aircraft autocannon and available in 141 total production examples in January of 1944. But these numbers severely declined to just 9 operational units by December of that year, her losses not being replaced. The SDKFZ-141 was developed as a light reconnaissance fast tank, mounting the turret of the complete SDKFZ-222 series armored car, another cost-effective measure. At least some 4,000 PZKPFW-38T related production vehicles, of all forms, were ultimately pressed into service, sometimes used in Soviet hands as captured specimens, during the war and in the years following. This total of approximately 4,000 vehicles based on the Panzer 38T chassis represents one of the most successful vehicle families of World War II. The basic design proved so adaptable that it could be modified for virtually any role required by the German military, from frontline combat to logistics support to specialized engineering tasks. The international distribution of Panzer 38T tanks also reveals the global reach of this Czech design. Examples were also sold to a number of German allies, including Hungary 102, Slovakia 69, Romania 50, and Bulgaria 10. These exports spread Czech tank technology across much of Axis-controlled Europe, with each country adapting the vehicles to meet their specific needs and operational requirements. The story of these exported tanks often involved complex political and military relationships. The Slovak tanks, for example, were operated by a nominally independent nation that was actually a German puppet state. The irony of Slovak crews operating tanks originally designed for Czechoslovak independence was not lost on contemporary observers, and it became even more pronounced when some of these same tanks were used by Slovak partisans against German forces during the Slovak National Uprising of 1944. Slovak National Uprising. 13 tanks of this type were used by the Slovak insurgent army. This remarkable turn of events saw Czech-designed tanks, operated by Slovak crews, fighting against German forces, a fitting symbol of the complex loyalties and shifting alliances that characterized the final years of World War II in Eastern Europe. The Hungarian operation of Panzer 38T tanks provides another fascinating chapter in the vehicle's international story. Hungarian forces used their tanks primarily on the Eastern Front, where they fought alongside German units against the Soviet Union. The Hungarian army found the Czech design reliable and effective, though they also experienced the same limitations against advanced Soviet armor that had led to the tank's withdrawal from German frontline service. Romanian use of the Panzer 38T was perhaps the most challenging, as Romanian forces were expected to operate with relatively little German support, while facing increasingly sophisticated Soviet opposition. The Romanian designation T-38 reflected their integration of the vehicle into their own organizational structure, though operational effectiveness was limited by the same fundamental problems that had affected all users of the design by the later war years. Even more remarkable than its wartime service was the Panzer 38T's post-war legacy. The basic design continued to influence tank development well after the end of World War II, with several countries producing updated versions for their own use. At least some 4,000 PZKP 38T-related production vehicles, of all forms, were ultimately pressed into service, sometimes used in Soviet hands as captured specimens, during the war and in the years following. The 38T was gradually phased out of frontline duties, relegated to second-line roles in support of armored divisions. By 1943, though serial production continued on in the after-war years to help replenish various national inventories. Sweden's relationship with the Panzer 38T design illustrates the international appeal of Czech engineering even during wartime. Sweden had originally placed orders for the tank before the war, but was prevented from receiving them due to the German occupation of Czechoslovakia. However, the Swedes later acquired a license to produce their own version of the design, which they manufactured as the Stiarv M41 and operated well into the 1950s. SAV M43, Swedish license production models of assault gun form. The Swedish variants demonstrated the continued viability of the basic design concept even as warfare evolved, proving that the fundamental engineering principles that had made the original LT Version 38 successful remained valid under different operational conditions and requirements. Switzerland also found value in the Panzer 38T design family, acquiring a substantial number of Jagdpanzer 38 tank destroyers after the war. G13, Switzerland designation of post-war Jagdpanzer 38T models, 158 received from Czech sources. The Swiss operated these vehicles as the G13, using them to supplement their defensive capabilities during the early Cold War period. The fact that neutral Switzerland chose to acquire these vehicles speaks to their continued military value even in the post-war environment. The global reach of the Panzer 38T design is further illustrated by examining some of the more exotic users of the type. The Persian tanks, delivered before the war, saw action during the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran in 1941. A further order of 200 was interrupted by the German occupation of Czechoslovakia. Iranian TNHs were assigned to the 1st and 2nd Divisions and the Imperial Guards, but were overwhelmed by the 1,000 tanks used by the Soviet Army in the Anglo-Soviet invasion in August 1941. Despite their small numbers, these tanks represented some of the most modern equipment available to Iranian forces at the time. Perhaps the most remarkable international deployment of the Panzer 38T design occurred in South America, where Peruvian forces used their tanks in actual combat during the 1941 Ecuadorian-Peruvian War. The Peruvian Tank Battalion played an important role in the 1941 Ecuadorian-Peruvian War, spearheading the attack across the Zaramila River and at Aranillas. This was helped by the fact that the Ecuadorian army had no modern anti-tank guns, and their artillery was horse-drawn. Ultimately, the last LTP tanks would see retirement from active service only in 1988. The tanks were also used for counterinsurgency operations against the Shining Path. The fact that these Czech-designed tanks remained in active service until 1988, nearly 50 years after their original design, speaks volumes about the fundamental soundness of the engineering principles embodied in the LT Panzer 38. Few military vehicles have demonstrated such longevity, and even fewer have adapted successfully to such diverse operational environments and requirements. Today, surviving examples of the Panzer 38T and its variants can be found in museums and private collections around the world, serving as tangible reminders of this remarkable chapter in military history. These preserved vehicles allow modern visitors to appreciate the craftsmanship and attention to detail that characterized Czech industrial production during the interwar period. The technical excellence of these machines becomes apparent when examining surviving examples. Despite decades of hard use under various flags and in diverse climates, many of these vehicles retain their mechanical integrity and even operational capability. This durability was not accidental, but rather the result of careful engineering and quality control that had been hallmarks of Czech industry throughout the 20th century. Museum displays of the Panzer 38T often emphasize the vehicle's international service and the complex political circumstances that led to its widespread deployment. Visitors can trace the tank's journey from Czech independence symbol to German war machine to post-war historical artifact, gaining insight into the broader patterns of 20th century European history through the lens of this single vehicle design. The restoration of surviving examples has also provided valuable insights into the manufacturing techniques and materials science of the 1930s and 1940s. Modern specialists working on these vehicles have gained new appreciation for the sophisticated approaches to metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and quality control that were already well developed in Czechoslovakia's industrial sector by the late interwar period. Private collectors have also played an important role in preserving examples of the Panzer 38T and its variants. These dedicated enthusiasts often invest significant resources in maintaining operational examples, ensuring that future generations can experience these machines as their original operators knew them. The continued operation of restored vehicles at military exhibitions and historical events helps maintain public awareness of this important chapter in military and technological history. The story of the Panzer 38T ultimately transcends its purely military significance to become a metaphor for the complex relationship between technology, politics, and human agency in the modern world. The tank represents both the creative potential of free societies and the tragic consequences of political failure and international aggression. With 1,168 38T tanks produced by the Germans from 1940 through 1942, and thousands of armored fighting vehicle variants based on the same Czech design, the Wehrmacht's Panzer and anti-tank capability was greatly aided and sustained not only in the heady years of conquest, but also during the grinding period of retreat and final defeat. This assessment captures both the immediate military impact of the design and its longer-term significance for understanding the industrial and technological dimensions of World War II. The Czech engineers who created the LT version 38 in the workshops of Prague could never have imagined the global reach their design would ultimately achieve. From the forests of Poland to the deserts of North Africa, from the steppes of Russia to the jungles of South America, their creation would serve under many flags and in many causes, both just and unjust. The irony of democratic Czechoslovakia's finest military technology serving totalitarian Germany's war of conquest was not lost on contemporary observers, nor should it be forgotten by modern historians. The Panzer 38T story illustrates how technological innovation can outlive the political circumstances of its creation, taking on a life of its own as it spreads across borders and serves purposes never intended by its original designers. Yet the story also demonstrates the enduring value of engineering excellence and craftsmanship. Despite the tragic circumstances that led to its appropriation by Germany, the LT version 38 design proved its worth through decades of service under diverse conditions and requirements. The fact that variants of the basic design remained in service well into the post-war period speaks to the fundamental soundness of the engineering principles that guided its creation. The Panzer 38T thus stands as both a monument to Czech industrial achievement and a reminder of the ways in which technological progress can be co-opted by political forces beyond the control of its creators. It embodies the complexity of 20th century history, where the boundaries between aggressor and victim, between innovation and appropriation, between progress and tragedy, were often blurred beyond recognition. In the end, the Panzer 38T earned its place in history not through the political circumstances of its birth or adoption, but through the consistent demonstration of reliability, adaptability, and effectiveness that characterized its service across multiple continents and under numerous flags. It represents the enduring triumph of good engineering over adverse circumstances and the ability of human creativity to transcend the political limitations of its time and place. The legacy of the Panzer 38T continues to influence modern military vehicle design, particularly in the emphasis on reliability, maintainability, and adaptability that characterized the original Czech approach. Contemporary tank designers still study the lessons learned from vehicles like the LT version 38, recognizing that the fundamental requirements of mobility, protection, and firepower must be balanced against practical considerations of cost, complexity, and supportability. As we reflect on this remarkable story of engineering excellence and historical complexity, we are reminded that the tools of war are created by human intelligence and ingenuity, deployed by human decision, and judged ultimately by human conscience. The Panzer 38T carries within its steel frame the dreams of Czech independence, the ambitions of German conquest, and the hopes of soldiers from many nations who trusted their lives to its mechanical reliability and protective armor. Today, as the last survivors of World War II pass from the scene, vehicles like the Panzer 38T serve as tangible links to that pivotal period in human history. They remind us not only of the technological achievements of the past, but also of the moral choices that gave those achievements their historical meaning. In studying the story of the Panzer 38T, we gain insight not just into military history or technological development, but into the fundamental questions of how human creativity interacts with political power in shaping the course of events. The Czech Republic today can look back on the LT version 38 with justifiable pride, recognizing it as a symbol of their nation's industrial capabilities and technological innovation during a period of democratic independence. While the circumstances that led to its appropriation by Nazi Germany were tragic, the enduring excellence of the design itself stands as a testament to the skill and dedication of the engineers and workers who created it in the factories of Prague. The Panzer 38T story thus concludes not with military defeat or technological obsolescence, but with recognition of lasting achievement. In museums around the world, in the memories of veterans and historians, and in the continuing influence on modern military design, the legacy of this remarkable vehicle endures. It reminds us that excellence in engineering, like excellence in any human endeavor, transcends the immediate circumstances of its creation to become part of the permanent heritage of human achievement. From its origins as the pride of Czech industry to its service under German command, from its evolution through numerous variants to its post-war legacy in multiple countries, the Panzer 38T represents one of the most successful and influential military vehicle designs of the 20th century. Its story encompasses not only the technical aspects of tank development, but also the broader themes of international relations, industrial development, and human adaptation to changing circumstances that characterized the era of total war. As we close this examination of the Panzer 38T story, we are left with a deeper appreciation for the complex relationships between technology, politics, and human purpose that shape historical events. The tank that began as a symbol of Czech independence became an instrument of German conquest, yet ultimately transcended both roles to earn recognition as a masterpiece of engineering design. In this transformation lies a lesson about the enduring power of human creativity to overcome the limitations of its historical circumstances and achieve lasting significance through excellence in conception and execution.